Why is he doing? I was with him. Right here by yourself talking to him. I don't know.
Because we can't.
What you're not gonna do is push past this woman right here. That's what y'all not gonna do.
We're trying not to. Everybody else is getting in. And look what she's doing.
No, because you're coming in to disrupt.
You're coming in. It's not even enough room. It's beyond capacity. It's a fire hazard.
This is.
Fire marshal. Did you take a count? Did you take a count?
Could you stop? Could you stop? Could you stop?
Don't touch me.
We have kids here, people. We have kids.
You go back. You gotta go back to Europe. Go back to Europe. Go back to Europe. Go back to Europe. You gotta go back to Europe.
You're going to jail. Touch me, you going to jail.
No,
You going to jail. You're going to jail.
Born and raised.
My daughter is right in this room. I swear to God. I swear to God. You come in here, start making a disruption. These police are gonna do something today. I'm not sure you understand.
We have childcare in this room. We have childcare in this room. Please be
Childcare right here.
Please be respectful.
We were walking.
Ma'am, Ebenezer, chill out. Ebenezer, chill out. I understand, Ebenezer. Ebenezer.
So be quiet. You're the only one yelling. Be quiet then. Be quiet then. Be quiet then.
Please.
There is kids.
Please, there are children in here. I'm providing childcare. Anyone or any of you me and everyone in here will have a fucking problem. We will have a fucking problem if anything happens to those two kids.
Nothing's gonna happen.
We just want to get into
just
the
chill.
we want to get into the anti-white seminar.
No one said it was an anti-white
Oh,
seminar.
we know it's an anti-white seminar. We want to get into it. Because we were at the last one, it was completely anti-white rhetoric the entire time. So we
I
want to
don't
get
think
into it.
the last one wasn't an anti-white rhetoric. It was about white privilege.
Yeah, it was completely yeah, they're spreading.
This man came and started crashing at me.
Look, she's walking up on me. She's walking up on me.
No, I want him to go to jail.
Oh, yeah.
I want him to go to jail.
I got plenty of footage on my camera. Me being grabbed, shoved, and kicked. And kicked.
He's going to jail today.
Two of your people. You guys know that. Make sure to smash the like button. Come on.
I'm not
Get
leaving
this
before
video out
he
there.
goes to jail.
This is crazy. They are attacking us. We have it on film. They are attacking us. No, we're not going to shoot. You're attacking us. We have it on film. We're here to document this event. No, we're here to document this event. You guys started attacking us.
Have a meeting.
You guys
Tried
should
to
be
close
ashamed
the
of
door.
yourself. You go here, cover the event.
And it's on
You should all be ashamed of yourself. We came here to document the event and you attacked us.
Thank you. Thank you.
We came here to document the event and you attacked us. How do you guys feel about that? How do you feel? Are you reporting? Are you reporting? Yeah.
Where's your badge?
How do you feel?
Where's your badge? Where's your credentials?
I got 1,000 more people watching than the fucking Santa Monica News.
Excuse me.
I'm bigger media than any of them are.
I already said
I got more people watching than any of them do.
Watch your language though.
Watch your language. You guys are
but
kicking and shoving and hitting.
I don't know if I've talked
What
to
are you
somebody,
talking
but
about?
I feel like I've been calm. I'm asking you.
Well,
I've talked to most of
your people have not been
Well, that's fine. That's
Your
fine.
people have shoved me
You're
and
being
kicked me and
combative with
punched
me.
me.
You're being combative with me, and I'm not being combative with you.
Why are you guys attacking me?
Am I attacking
Your
you?
group is, yeah.
Am I attacking you?
Not you, but your
Am
group
I
is.
attacking
Your
you?
group is.
Why are you here?
You're defending the attack.
Why are you here?
I'm not here.
Why are you here? Last time.
Why
are you here? You guys were here last time. Why are you guys here? Why are you here?
Exactly.
Because it's my town. It's my town. That's why I'm here. I'm born and raised. My country too, fool. I'm part Indian too. Choctaw. Feel me?
I'm a
I'm
California
Indian,
resident.
straight up.
I have every right to. Yeah, so I have every right to be in there. here.
No, you don't have a right to be here. Not with that attitude.
Yes.
Not with that attitude. Not with that attitude.
I went and met you and didn't say anything. You were a fucking dick.
Come on, bro.
You know that.
You know why? Because you're acting. Because you're acting. That's why. I rewrite you, baby. I rewrite you. I rewrite you.
All lives matter. Close the doors.
Get in. Come on, Sam. Come on,
Where are the cops? Like, are you kidding me? The cops are right there. Why aren't they doing anything? Stay here, Kaylin.
My eyes on you. I heard you well.
You should.
I will. Yes.
Good job.
Just start up a little. Scream at people. Yeah.
I don't know what I did.
I think we have succeeded. We have succeeded already. Yeah. We have succeeded.
You out.
Don't
Why
touch
you
me.
out?
Don't touch
You
me.
get out. How did she get
This
in?
is a public park. I'm not bothering anybody.
Those who think that we should
And I blame the police.
call it a day in the name of safety, raise your hands. Those who believe that since we've gotten to part of the workshop and there are safety issues, there are people at risk here, and are willing to say that we should shut the workshop down now, raise your hands.
Stop taking pictures.
Why? It's a
stop.
public park.
Just stop.
I'm not bothering you.
Those who believe that we should try to finish the workshop, raise your hand. Well, then let's see whether or not a presenter can be heard. I assume that you started singing, I was out there, because you could not hear the speaker. Is that correct? No? Oh.
What's the matter with you?
I'm not bothering you. You're the one
Yeah.
coming here to harass me.
So we're going to shut the door, keep the doors closed as much as we can.
Sick.
We're going to continue the workshop. Thank you, everybody.
ask for a name tag so that you can wear it.
Oh, I'm afraid to even ask for anything. He's already blocked me. The other lady wanted me kicked out. I'm just want to stand here.
So I actually am going to bring you a name tag, and I'm going to bring the list so that way you can sign in.
That's fine.
I'm going to take that risk for you. Okay?
I'll do it myself as long as you tell him to just leave me alone.
Okay.
Everybody? There are people in here that need to hear this. So it's great that we're going to get you. There's one of you. We're just not so, there's some people on the back. If anybody wants to sit on the floor, there's cameras on the floor. And then that, but if you obviously if you take it, that would be great. Yes. It is perfectly okay to sit on the floor or be back by the wall, but if you're standing up in the middle, it's hard to do that. All right. Okay, so we are welcoming back Rick Eaton. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you. I'm pretty loud, so I'll do the best I can. So as I was saying, the heyday of the Klan was in the 19 teens and 20s. This is one of the most famous movies from the silent era, a movie called Birth of a Nation. It was actually came from a book called The Klansman, which was written about the Reconstruction Klan, the Klan that was started immediately after the Civil War, but only lasted for about 5 years because the government was going to come in and shut it down during Reconstruction. They shut themselves down. They became active again in the early 20th century in 1915 when they lynched a Jewish man who was accused of a murder, which later found out he had nothing to do with. And a man on his deathbed confessed as to who had committed the murder and why. But this movie was one of the most famous of the day, the biggest silent films director, and really, as I say, kicked off this real peak of the Klan in the teens and 20s.
They told me not to go out there. They said
I want to move up to the 1960s into the 2000s because for a long time the Klan was essentially the only extremist group that we had.
I read about it. I wanted to see what it was about.
But the Klan was the primary one.
Curiosity
Many of
being
you know
satisfied?
about the civil rights
Are you with the
era
group
in the
outside?
50s and the
No, I
60s,
came by myself.
what went on with the
And I
Klan.
got
So I'm
attacked.
not going to talk about that too much.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about the 1960s because
I'm
the
trying to
people
find out what the group is
people
about.
that were running extremist groups at the time were very important. The first one up there is Dr. William Pierce. The second one, Richard Butler from the Aryan Nations Church in Idaho. Down in the left corner is Tom Metzger of White Aryan Resistance, formerly based right here in California in Fallbrook. And the fourth one is Matt Hale from a group called the Church of the Creator. Now the reason I use these is because these are some of the primary people that were running these groups from the 60s into the early 2000s. William Pierce actually used to be a professor of physics at Oregon State University in the 60s. And he gave up academia to start a white supremacy group. He started this group called the National Alliance. Later on in the skinhead era, he bought the Skinhead Music Company, not because he was interested in the music, but he knew what the recruiting value was. He's also known for this book called the Turner Diaries. And the Turner Diaries, which is actually written by a guy by the name of Andrew MacDonald, in fact, was William Pierce. And this is a book which has spawned attempts at a race war on more than one occasion. In the 1980s, there was crimes that we had right here in Los Angeles. In August 1990, the North Valley Jewish Community Center shooting. Buford Furo, after reading this book and another, walked into the North Valley Jewish Community Center, fired off 80-plus rounds from a semi-automatic rifle, hit 3 kids, a teenage girl, a woman that worked at the center. Fortunately, didn't kill anybody, he looked around and he saw he was shooting at 5 to 8-year-old kids. He, not being the brightest bulb on the string, he then went out onto Rinaldi Avenue. He abandoned his van, which he parked a couple blocks away. He carjacked a woman out on Rinaldi, went down to Chatsworth out in the West Valley, where he encountered a Filipino postal worker by the name of Joseph Aledo. He enticed him over with the idea he was going to mail a letter. Instead, he pulled out his pistol and killed him. He then accomplished something pretty difficult in the West Valley, where I grew up, is he managed to find a taxi cab. And he then took a bizarre taxi ride to Las Vegas. It cost some $800. Then he realized he'd abandoned his van back at the scene, and he turned himself into the local office of the FBI. I always thank law enforcement. LAPD did us a big favor that day because they allowed a TV camera to pan around the van, and in it were 5,000 rounds of ammunition. And peeking up among that was the very top of this book, just that little arrow at the top. But that was enough for my assistant at the time, who's now an analyst with the FBI in Washington, to know exactly what happened that day. And this was Firo was motivated by this identity philosophy and the idea that Jews are responsible for all the problems in the world, and the best way to deal with it is go out and attack Jewish targets. So the third guy up there was Tom Metzger of White Aryan Resistance. He was formerly of Fallbrook, California for a long time. He was one of the big organizers of skinheads and so forth. And this was his message, is, well, something like what these people are promoting outside is the idea the white race is going to disappear unless you do something about it. Tom Metzger was never going to fire the first shot in the race war. But if he could get someone else to do it by putting out publications like this, he would. He's now calling his group the Resistor, and he's based in Indiana because he lost his house in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. But he's now close to 80, and like the other two, the first two, Butler and Pierce, are dead. He's close to 80 and pretty much non-issue at this time. He also, if you saw, you didn't see the first picture, but he was wearing a T-shirt which said, "Some people are only alive because it's illegal to kill them." That was the T-shirt he was wearing. So the fourth guy I had up there was Matt Hale of the Church of the Creator, the Creativity Movement. And Matt Hale was a young guy, an attorney who took over this group from a guy who started in the 70s. He also spawned a major hate crime of Benjamin Smith, who went on an equal opportunity shooting spree in Illinois and Indiana. Matt Hale, interestingly enough, is currently doing 40 years in prison because he solicited the murder of a federal judge hearing his trademark case about the name the Church of the Creator, which another group in Oregon had trademarked, and they sued him, got the rights to the name. They had the rights to the name. So he's currently doing 40 years. So all four people up there that I showed you, Metzger's in his 80s, the other three, two of them are dead, he's in prison. So what we've had is kind of a major turnover in a lot of this white supremacy philosophy. These are some of the publications. Back in the old days, when I first started doing this work, I subscribed to World called Stormfront, stormfront.org. It's actually a very safe site to go to if you want to see what these people are saying. I always tell law enforcement, take a look at this site, because there is probably, if you do a search, and you can do it, they don't try to send you cookies or make you sign up or anything. I'll bet there was something about this meeting on Stormfront. I was neglected. I should have looked one before I came. But Stormfront has international sections. They have, you see up here, they have 968,000 threads. They've been around since the beginning of the internet in 1995, the beginning of the web. The internet goes back much further. And 326,000 members, although all of those are not active at any given time. And of course, 8 or 10 or 20 of those are probably me. But what's interesting here is you see that just this morning, I took these figures this morning, at 6 o'clock this morning, there were 1,800 people using this forum at one time. So one of the subjects I think came up in your last meeting was the subject of white genocide. And this is a blog by a guy by the name of Bob Whitaker. And interestingly enough, he just passed away about 6 weeks ago. But Whitaker, interesting enough, was a former professor of economics. He was a Reagan administration appointee, and he created something called the mantra. Okay, so he created this thing called the mantra, and it's pretty detailed. There's not much importance, but the bottom 2 lines are the important ones, because they say we are anti-racist. What they say are anti-white. Anti-racist is the code for anti-white. This is what these people think, that if you're against racist groups like the clowns outside, then you must be against white people. And that's what but this is a new thing that they've come up with in more recent years, saying that anybody who's anti-racist like this group here must be anti-white. This group looks pretty mixed to me. Okay, so, and interesting enough, there are people like Tom Metzger who would say his biggest enemies are not people in this room necessarily, well, some of them, because what he would say is his biggest enemies were the white people who don't understand what's happening, white genocide is occurring, and they're the ones that are his biggest enemies, not minorities and Jews and African Americans and others. So, what do we have now? We've heard a lot about this thing called the alt-right. This has come to fore just in the last couple of years, although they say for even longer.
Why are you harassing me?
Because you don't belong here.
Why don't I belong here?
Because you're here to disrupt.
Do you know me?
You're here to take pictures.
Do you know me?
No, but I recognize you.
I've never been here before, ever. You're just making things up now.
You see that their mission is an independent organization dedicated to the heritage, identity, and future of people of European descent in the United States. Pretty much says what they're about. So this is Richard Spencer. You may be familiar with Richard Spencer if you heard, saw on the news 2 weeks after the election, the conference that was held in Washington where he got up in front of the crowd, did a Hitler salute, and the whole crowd did a Hail Trump. That's Richard Spencer. Spencer, again, is also educated. See, he's got a degree from the University of Chicago and another from the University of Virginia. But what's interesting, I always get a kick out of this one, because you see, they like to build themselves up. So Spencer's publications and activities have been reported on by the New York Times, Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, NPR, BuzzFeed, Vice.com. Spencer has been a frequent guest commentator on the cable network RT Network. Anybody familiar with RT? RT was one of the biggest purveyors of false news. And while they have some news with a kernel of truth, that's the only one he's actually a commentator on. These others, they like to cite, well, we've been written up in such and such and Post in the Times and so forth. Well, not exactly. So you go with this alt-right, you go from people in suits and ties like Richard Spencer to the other side. This is a website called The Daily Stormer, which some people are now claiming this is more active with their forum than even Stormfront, which has always been since 1995 the largest white supremacy site. He likes to change this, so his graphic up at the top today is looks like some kind of computer game where the white hero is defeating the African American villains. Here's another version of his site from earlier this year, where he must be a Harry Potter fan because he said that world's biggest J.K. Rowling fan site, and he photoshopped J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, into a Nazi uniform. Now, if you know anything at all about Harry Potter, that's exactly opposite of the way that somebody would think. But of course, this is another. This guy who runs this site, and Andrew Anglin was one of the first to embrace Donald Trump when he came out with his announcement, and he called for his ban on all Muslims. He called him the glorious leader. Anybody remember where the glorious leader came from?
What are you doing?
No.
Representing gay power.
Communist China. We used to call Mao the glorious leader. And, of course, North Korea, too. So, Anglin published this thing called A Guide to the Alt-Right. And you see that they use this Pepe the Frog. This is something which did not start as a Nazi thing. In fact, the artist has disavowed these guys, and because they're using it, he has officially retired Pepe. But they use this as their emblem. And what's interesting about this guide to alt-right, first of all, he was interviewed and he said, isn't the alt-right just a rebranding of neo-Nazism? Anglin said, yes. Do alt-righters support white supremacy? Yes. Who is the leader of the alt-right? Don't worry about it. You know, it says Nat. I don't know what that is. Does the alt-right support nationalism for all peoples? No. What should the alt-right do about Jews? Gas them. What they do about all the other minorities, homosexuals, gas them. So they're pretty clear about their beliefs, even though some of these people like to say differently. They came to the fore very much so in the election last year, online and so forth. And let's be very clear, I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. You have this alt-right that did something very unusual because extremist groups have generally not supported candidates. They have not come out for candidates that usually don't like either side. This is really the first time extremist groups like the alt-right, like the ones I've shown you earlier, actually came out publicly and supported a candidate. But I'm not saying that all Trump supporters are white supremacists and racists. They're not. But these guys made themselves very well known during the election, especially online, taking on anyone who criticized President Trump, both before and after the election. So who are the alt-right? Well, they've kind of added in some of these other, besides the groups that I've already talked about, the conspiracy theorists, people like Alex Jones, who believes that the Sandy Hook shooting was a myth, and puts on a lot of these other people that say almost any event that didn't happen, happened different, or didn't happen differently than what you've heard, including 9/11. That was the government conspiracy. Libertarians and paleoconservatives, the original white nationalist movement that I talked about, identitarian movements, which are pretty much youth movements, kind of third positionists that don't like right or left, but want to get their point across. They're more European, but it seems like some of these guys are probably part of that. The troll culture, people using some of these online forums, 4chan, 8chan, Reddit. These are forums where there's virtually no rules. And something called the manosphere, which...
I just want to remind people of something. If we'd rather you not take videos unless you had approval from the steering committee. Thank you.
If you want to receive this information, I'm going to show you how to get it. So the manosphere, which is guys disillusioned with the feminism in society. I kind of didn't take this seriously, but then I started looking at some of the websites and so forth that they're showing, and the truth is that there is a lot of extremism and white supremacy in some of those sites.
If you can honor the request not to video
gamer culture. So another one of these alt-right groups is this one called the American Freedom Party. And this is one that frequently uses the term white genocide.